Good morning, everybody. Hello, I'm Marco. I'm a member of the Italian fan club, Stephen Wilson and Porcupine Tree fan club. I'm joined today by Cristina and none other than
Hello.
Mr. Timothy Bowness. Thank you very much, Tim, to be here
Hello.
with us today. We're gonna interview Tim about the forthcoming releases from Noman, Housekeeping, and Swagger. So I think we can start with the question. Go, Cristina.
Yeah. Thank you, Tim, for being here with us. Thank you so
My pleasure.
much. The first question is quite demanding. As is known, the name No Man derives from a historical phrase taken from the poem entitled No Man is an Island by the
Yeah.
English poet and essayist John Donne, written in 1624, and which unfortunately is very current and returns cyclically as applicable for contingent socio-political situation.
Yeah.
In June 2016, PJ Harvey guest at the Dutch festival Down the Rabbit Hole, in the middle of her performance, recited Donne's poem in response of the outcome of Brexit referendum. No
Yeah.
Man, therefore, embodies an absolutely emblematic meaning, in our opinion, of the historical times we are going through, sadly confirming that the division among human beings is increasingly clear and evident. We ask you whether, in your opinion, you still believe that music can make each of us less of an island, and in what way? I know it's an important question, but...
Yeah. Well, you've started with a serious question.
Yeah, it's the first one then.
I think you're right. I think that we live in increasingly divisive times, and I don't think it's just Brexit or Trump. I think there are many other issues. I think that on so many issues, from the Gaza and Israeli conflict and so on, it's very, very difficult to have, it seems, in this era of social media in particular, articulate, reasoned, balanced discourse where people can listen to one side of an argument that's phrased well and another side of an argument phrased well. And I could go into it in great detail, but I don't necessarily myself like being divisive, but I see people on both sides behaving appallingly and writing incredibly aggressively. So again, something I won't mention, but somebody who is a very respected left-wing journalist who I like, but he regularly makes one-line insults about the politicians, which all they do is fuel the anger, fuel the prejudice, whereas actually there should be a detailed breakdown of why this is a wrong attitude to have. But I think that because of the nature of social media, for whatever reason, it seems that reasoned discourse on either side doesn't seem possible and doesn't seem welcome. And actually, I don't blame people for not trying, because when they try, they are battered down.
Yeah.
They're battered down by their own side for not stressing it perhaps as strongly as they should, and they're battered down by the opposition for having the temerity of disagreeing. And so I think that the nature of political argument has become almost impossible in this day and age. Relating to that, in some ways, I've sometimes taken this option of retreating into beauty. There's an early No Man lyric which ties in with the box set, 'cause it's a B-side that we produced that's on Love Size. And the lyric, in effect, is chronicling the chaos, the urban chaos outside of the room that this person's inhabiting. And because they feel their voice is so small, and this was written in like 1990, 1991, they're retreating into art, music, literature, film. And I've got to say that sometimes I'm guilty of that now, that actually I feel that my voice carries so little weight, and because I don't want to be a part of that vicious disagreement on either side, that in some ways I do lose myself in the beauty of music or the fantasy of a book, partly to escape it. So in some ways, I really do hope that music, literature, film can still be sort of healing things that join people together. And so, you know, I'm really lucky that when I do meet fans at gigs or when I talk to them online, generally speaking, we don't get into political debates, but we do get into detailed, enthusiastic discussions about what songs mean to us or what art can mean to us. So in some ways, we're kind of bypassing the issues, but yeah. I hope that it's a unifying factor despite the world that we live in. And the only other thing I'd say to carry on from that is that, of course, we can't live, you know, this no man is an island. We cannot live without being aware of the political chaos around us. So I kind of find in my music that lyrically, even when I'm not aware of it, these things seep through into the songs, because you cannot help as a human being in 2023 to not be affected by what you're seeing around you, you know, the inhumanity and so on.
Yeah, I agree completely with you, and I think Marco the same, because we believe the same, because for the very fact that we are here, we believe that music can make a difference, can still make the difference some way. Then okay, thank you so much.
Therefore, we got in deep now talking about music and art in general. The first question about the box set itself is about the artwork. The front cover of the Housekeeping boxes is really well looking. It's in the style of No Man, but at the same time, it feels like something new. And I wanted to ask you how you guys came on that. I think that's Carl Glover's artwork. So how you decide about that?
Well, it's interesting because it varies with No Man covers. So with some of them, I've had a very strong idea of the cover. So Flower Mouth and Returning Jesus, I knew exactly what I wanted for the covers. Carl Glover made that a reality. The same with Dry Cleaning Ray. But then Carl, for example, when I described the concept behind Together We're Stranger, he came up with that image himself. And I think that's one of my favorite No Man sleeves.
That's beautiful.
It perfectly encapsulates the lyrics, the mood, while being this kind of quite fresh and abstract view of it as well. And on this occasion, so Love You to Bits, I think we both knew what we wanted. And that was interesting because it actually took, I don't think Carl's ever taken longer. He took 200 attempts at a cover to get what we wanted. And what was odd about that is that we very specifically knew what we wanted. So it was peculiar, but it took 200 attempts. And I think Carl's probably produced lots of covers for The Pineapple Thief and Marillion out of the reject pile from Love You to Bits, because they were really good covers. It was just not what we thought articulated the music or the lyric. And with this one, this came from a series of covers that Carl had my sleeve notes and also the sleeve notes from Matt Hammers. He had the track listing and he had the title. So he came up with a series of variations. And this time, I think rather than 200, he had about 18. And one of them, immediately, both myself and Stephen thought, okay, there's a kind of haunting quality that sort of reflects the feeling of some of the early No Man work. And so it developed from there, really, that we found one image that we liked, and that led to several other images. And then the box set, which of course has a lot of period photographs and ticket stubs and posters and so on and so forth. So this one came more from Carl's starting point than our starting point, but we all contributed to the way in which the box set as a whole looked.
Okay. Okay.
Okay,
In addition to the Housekeeping box set, Swagger is also being released. Can you tell us anything about it? Why release both products at the same time? Is there a saving if purchased together, or other reasons?
Well, there might be. I don't know. To be honest, I'll tell you why we did it. We'd finished the box set a very long time ago, probably about a year and a half, 2 years ago. So the artwork, the box set, the mastering, everything was ready. And it was put on hold because Stephen was releasing his albums. and then Porcupine Tree,
And Tree.
and so on and so forth. So it was delayed. So the album's actually been complete for some time. And when we were putting this together, you know, we already knew what the box set was going to be. What was lovely about Swagger, we were not expecting this. It happened totally spontaneously, probably only 3 months ago. And I think what it was that I re-listened to some pieces from this period. And I spoke to Stephen and said, actually, these are really quite good. I'd almost forgotten completely. And then Stephen, over the next couple of days, said, you know, we did this at the same time and this at the same time. And he unearthed about 40, 50 minutes of music, some of which I had genuinely forgotten. I mean, there was one piece of music on this, which is an improvisation between myself and Stephen. And we improvised it live onto a cassette.
Okay.
And it was lovely. And I thought, how did we do that? When did we do that? And then there was the stuff from Swagger. There was an outtake from Swagger. So all of a sudden, both of us were releasing to pieces of music that we'd written during a sort of year period that we've never really documented, because when Noman first started, it was very eclectic. Stephen and I had very, very diverse tastes, and the music would go from really short, hard-hitting pieces with almost a kind of a funk or post-punk element to 7.5-minute epic ballads, to pieces with almost a progressive or psychedelic quality, or to the pieces that are on Speak. If you know the album Speak, which is something we were obsessed with, which is a kind of a timeless, almost singer-songwriter territory. We both loved a lot of singer-songwriters from the 60s and early 70s, people like Nick Drake, John Martin, Sandy Denny, Nico. And we also loved a lot of the music from the time when we first got together. There were artists like the Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance, who were producing this really quite beautiful, almost timeless music. And so Speak was perhaps, hopefully, our distinctive version of that.
Version of both, yeah.
But during that time, we were still writing really quite vicious rock songs and really quite epic ballads. Anyway, there's a certain period before we got signed. We did Colours in 1990, summer of 1990. And from there on in, it's well documented. But what isn't documented is that period between Speak and Colours, where we were making a music that, it turns out, it was when we were playing live. We were playing live in London and Manchester. And although we weren't signed to a record company, we were building up an audience. We were getting people who came to see us as a live band. And we were almost writing music for those live performances. And they were really exciting. I've got to say, you know, I still miss it now. It was me, Stephen, Ben, and the three of us were almost like three front people at the stage. Quite dynamic live sets. We were working with backing tapes, but it was very live and very spontaneous. And so the Swagger era captures the music that we wrote and we recorded during that period. And it's never really been released properly. So it's kind of, it goes from the summer of 1989 to the summer of 1990. We released Colours, which was very different. And it really captures a very, I think, unusual and unique side of the band. Most of it is more electronic, more rock influenced as well, because of the live element. But what's interesting is it came together, and it was almost like the first album we'd never released, because it was so coherent. It really made for a coherent album statement in the way that I think Speak makes for a coherent album statement. And what we found out is that this 45-minute album and Speak, another 40-minute album from this, we've probably still got another hour or so's material, which is quite different from that. So it was really kind of, it was exciting because it came together really quickly. We thought, God, this is really quite good. And suddenly the album
put together
as an album. And that's why we released it. So Swagger's being released on the Burning Shed label as a kind of not homemade, but it's a home release. And the box set is released on the original label that we released.
Okay.
The label on. So they're two
One
different.
Little Indian. Yeah. Okay.
And they came together at two different times. And of course, it was really nice to put something together so quickly that we both felt really excited by, and we wrote sleeve notes for. So there was kind of, what was nice, it was almost creative in the way the music was as well. It was like, it was quite rapid.
Rapid, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Unlike my explanation.
Yeah, yeah, quite rapid.
Don't worry. That's why we're here. And so that's about Swagger. And what's inside the box set itself? On the other hand, beside the two main records, Love Blows and Love Cries and Flower Mouth.
So you've got the Love Size material, which was the kind of the singles and B-sides from the early period. You've got outtakes from that. So some of the earlier different mixes or the pieces that weren't released. Flower Mouth is there as a complete album on one of the discs. So there's quite a lot. So you get all the B-sides, quite a number of alternate mixes. Because when we produced Love Blows and Love Cries, which I'm still really pleased with, I always liked the album, so did Stephen. I think because it was never reissued, people always assumed we didn't like it. And we did.
Yeah.
I mean, the story behind that album, it's a rare one in that we'd finished the album in 1982. And I've got it in the room next door. There's only me and Stephen have this. There is a white label version with a finished sleeve and the original version of the album. And it's actually 50% different. It had a longer version of Sweetheart Raw, a much longer version of Tulip, and completely different mixes of some of the songs. Because when we were recording that album, we went into a lot of the biggest studios in Britain. We were using very big studios with big engineers. I mean, not big physically, but
of course.
Okay, yeah, of course. In terms of name, yeah.
With the Shaman and Björk, who were on a label at the time. And interestingly, that version of the album got rejected. The record company said, it's not going to hit single on it. And we were obviously initially a little annoyed. But we went back and we recorded a few more pieces. And they really liked Only Baby. And actually we did, although it was written, it's one of the only things we've done where it's like, okay, let's write a song as a single. We liked it. And we refashioned the album around Only Baby. We created an introduction for that, an orchestral introduction. And we rethought the rest of the album. So we dropped a couple of pieces, brought in a couple of pieces, and we had the confidence then of our own opinions. So on the original version, we used some, like Painting Paradise. We had the Painting Paradise version that we'd recorded in a huge studio with all of the huge reverbs. And we listened to it and we thought, that's just not us. And so we went with the demo that we'd recorded in Stephen's studio.
Okay.
So if you look at the credits on Love Blows and Love Cries, the finished album, quite a few of those tracks, they're recorded in our home studio. So in the end, the second version of the album that came out in the summer of 1993, we thought was a better version of the album. So we do include a few of the alternative mixes.
Alternative takes, okay.
Yeah, so people can decide whether we were mad or not. And then the stuff like the radio sessions we did, both acoustic radio sessions with Colin Edwin and so on joining us, and Chris Maitland. I think Chris Maitland and Colin are on one of them. And Colin plays double bass on about 5 or 6 tracks, but Chris is used on one. And of course, Chris is a great drummer. And all Chris is doing on this radio session, which is live acoustic, is hitting a cymbal like that.
Okay.
So we use this great drummer.
Just to...
Yeah. And if he gets out of line, we point at him and tell him off, you know. So there's those. And there's one session recording which has never been heard before, which we did a recording with a drummer for one session. We did a Radio 5, I think it was, BBC Radio 5. And we used a drummer who'd been in a band called Slab that Stephen and I liked. And we've never ever released that. I'd never even heard it until we were doing the tapes for it. So there's a version of Sweetheart Raw with this drummer we use, which is great. So there are quite a number of sort of unreleased pieces. So it's a coming together of all the officially released tracks plus lots of B-sides, mixes, and sessions. And then within the package, you get an essay from Matt Hammers, who does a No Man fan site, who's a young American.
Yeah.
And then we have an essay from me and a mini essay from Stephen. So, you know, there's a lot of
point of views,
box and quite a lot of photographs from the period as well.
Oh, because the next question is about the booklet, and then you are talking about the booklet within the box set. Then it seems really interesting. Then in the booklet, we can find the essay by you, Stephen, Matt Hammers. How big it is, the booklet? And
I think I mean, this is off the top of my head, 64 pages, I think.
64 pages.
I mean, if you stay there, I can show you.
Yeah, of course.
Okay, stay there.
Yeah. We are so lucky tonight.
Cool.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that.
Don't worry.
Don't worry.
There you go. So it's
beautiful.
a sort of
wow.
10-inch.
That's beautiful.
10-inch. Well, this was it really. You know, basically we tried to buy the music back from the record label. The record label didn't want us to do that. So in the end, we worked in association with them to produce
that. Okay.
Was the best and most beautiful thing we could. So you have three
CDs
there, 2 discs.
2 discs.
So it's 5 discs and lots and lots.
Then 64 pages. Beautiful.
Indeed. And yes, and the reproductions are really nice. And so from anything from early reviews as well as the sleeve notes to nice examples of tape boxes. And I was really surprised because I don't know how they got it, but there's one of my original lyric sheets, because I've tended to sort of write probably from the 90s. I write on my computer or my iPhone when I'm writing lyrics or text. And this actually has a kind of handwritten piece, which I've no idea. Probably I'd left it at Stevens and he kept it. And here you go. As you're online, I found it. That is the original.
The original vinyl.
Okay. Love Blows and Love Cries.
Love Cries, of which there are 2 copies, and that's the white label.
Wow.
Version of it.
So, Tim, you said that the label didn't want you to buy the rights for the songs. Is it just for Love Blows and Love Cries, right? Or also for
no, basically they own all of it.
Okay.
From 1990 to 1994. So Love Sighs, Love Blows and Love Cries, and Flower Mouth. So all of that material. And you know, luckily they did want to release this material, and so we worked in association with them, and I think they're really pleased with it as well.
That's cool. So the next question is actually about Matt Hammers, because I know him. I read his blog a lot, and I would like to know how you came across him, how you discovered the blog, and why you choose him for this task.
Well, basically, Matt approached me through the blog, and I was impressed with his obsessive attention to detail. And of course, you know, it's great because we've had No Man fan sites before. I think there's a Polish No Man fan site, and there's Tony Kinson did an excellent No Man fan site for many years. And so it was lovely to see the site, and it was really nicely designed. And Matt seemed to have genuine enthusiasm and a real sort of attention to detail. So I sort of admired the nature of the questions he was asking me. And so it just felt to me that because he'd done so much work on the site, you know, he kind of deserved.
So
that was it really. It was a way of thanking him for doing what he'd done, because, you know, we genuinely appreciate it. You know, the thing is, we do love the music. And so, of course, for us, when that love is shown by other people, you know, we appreciate it.
Especially from young people. I mean, I'm just a couple of years older than him, I think. And how is it to reach a younger demographic with music was released 30 years ago?
Well, it's fantastic. I mean, it doesn't happen as often as it used to, in a way. So I certainly remember when I was listening to music when I was in my teens, a lot of the music I would listen to, obviously there were people who were younger than me, there were people who were just a few years older than me, but I was always interested in, let's say, jazz artists who were 30, 40 years older than me or something, or rock artists who were 20 years older than me or so on. So I guess for my generation of music fan, we were very well aware of the generations that had come before us and the generations afterwards. And despite the fact that music is more ubiquitous now, there doesn't seem to be quite as much cross-generational listening. You know, you occasionally get it, it's true, but yeah, so of course it's really important, you know, and really gratifying when people who are younger also understand or feel this music, you know, because I mean, say the fact that Joni Mitchell's 20 odd years older than me doesn't mean that I don't feel her music intensely, because I do, you know.
Yeah. Thank you. The next question is, in your opinion, what were the most important steps that allowed you to get signed to One Little Indian at that time? Probably the cover of Donovan Colors. And I wanted to ask you also, why did you choose this single? For what reason? 1965 single.
Yeah. Sheer cheek. So yes, I think you're right. Basically, and I sort of discussed this in the sleeve notes to Swagger, actually. We were playing in London. We were both incredibly ambitious. And Noman were building up an audience. We were playing at decent venues like the Marquee, which is quite renowned, the 100 Club, the Rock Garden, the Borderline in Manchester. So we were on the same sort of bills that up-and-coming bands like Oasis and Blur were also playing. And although we were building up an audience, and the good thing was we'd play, we'd be booked back, and we'd have more people the next time, we were getting nowhere. And I'd moved to London to be closer to Stephen so that we could take the band more seriously. And by the summer of 1990, despite the things that were going well for us, we couldn't get a journalist to go to the gigs. We couldn't get a person from a record company to go to the gigs. And I moved back home to the northwest of England, near sort of in between Manchester and Liverpool. And I just read that the Happy Mondays were going to do a cover version of Donovan's Colours. And I spoke to Stephen about it because both of us really liked Donovan. When I said that we liked 60s singer-songwriters like Drake, Sandy Denny, John Martin, we adored Donovan's music. And we'd already done at least one Donovan cover at that stage. River Song, I think, which is on Speak. And so I said to Stephen, why don't we, as a joke, re-record Colours, or do a cover version of Colours before Happy Mondays do it? And he thought, great. I went to his house and we did a really unexpected version of it because we used a sort of hip hop sample. We also incorporated Ben's classical violin, and the combination we thought was really quite fresh and quite unique, that had just come from a joke. So we were really quite excited by what had happened. And it was really almost like a last throw of the dice. We were going nowhere. We did this and we thought, let's just produce a 7-inch single of it. We knew we were going to lose a lot of money, but we thought we'd do it. And I wrote, given the nature of Noman's music, which is serious, I wrote a comedy publicity sheet. And I'd studied very carefully the journalists I thought who might like us. And we sent 5 copies of the single out. And we ended up within a week. It was unbelievable. Stephen phoned me up and said, well, you do know that we're single of the week in Melody Maker. And so from nowhere, this single. And luckily, we ended up being single of the week in Melody Maker, single of the week in Sounds, one of the other 3 big magazines. Time. Single of the week on Channel 4 television, their teletext. Sounds crazy, but teletext used to be a big thing at the time. And their single of the week was Colours. So suddenly, with about 5 or 6 copies of a single sent out, we were single of the week everywhere. The jokes luckily went down quite well. The music went down even better. And within a couple of weeks, we had our gigs packed with record company people, journalists, and so on. And so really, it was entirely due to colours. And I would say in particular, there was one journalist, a guy called Chris Roberts, who absolutely loved the band, came to the next gig, and he's been a supporter ever since. And he's been really important to us. So, you know, I'd say that it was a big part of it. And funnily enough, around the same time, the Shaman heard us and really liked us. And they did a remix for Noman for free. I mean, that's how nice they were. They did a remix for free and then recommended us to their record label. So that was another, you know, so things just suddenly from going nowhere, there was a month or two, sort of July, August 1993, that everything came together for us.
Speaking about Love Blows and Love Cries a bit, I think it contains some of the most accessible material from both the band, but also from both of your careers, actually. But at the same time, it is ubiquitously a Noman record, the stuff that's specifically Noman. What do you think is still evident in the sound you have developed later from that record?
I think that there are certain chord sequences and textures that both of us gravitate towards. So, for example, you've heard the Harmony Codex, and the Harmony Codex, which is probably my equal favorite Stephen album. I think it's probably the closest Stephen has come to Noman at times.
We
and
agree.
interesting enough, Stephen mixed my album, and my new album, which is coming out next year, it's the first album where I've written and played everything, so the whole lot. And what is interesting is that a few of the tracks could be Noman. So what was odd is that Stephen does his solo album, I do my solo album, and there are tracks on both that could be Noman. That there's a sense of it, there's a certain kind of, I can describe it as bittersweet, because you use the word accessible. And I think that the best of Noman, in my view, manages to be quite emotional, but not overwhelming or overbearing. It has a kind of a bittersweet sensibility that's kind of appealing, which I think is in the Harmony Codex. I hope it's in my album. And I know that it's in Love Blows and Love Cries, that, you know, there's a kind of a certain rich harmony and chord progression that both of us go for, which I guess we're still drawn to. You know, we still naturally will gravitate towards this feeling in music. And I think for me as well, some of the best of what we do is in Noman, because I like experimental music, I like accessible music, but ultimately, and I think Stephen feels the same way, and maybe this is why Noman is Noman. While we'll both respond, you know, we can both listen to the most extreme King Crimson or Stockhausen and some pure pop, you know, whether it's Pet Shop Boys or Beach Boys. And I think that what Noman manages to do is almost synthesize this into something that's quite listenable and accessible, that despite having influences from all sides, whereas I know that sometimes on my own, I can flip between the extreme noise and the extreme pop. I always think Noman, for whatever reason, whenever I write with Stephen, we balance each other.
Everything.
I think that's Noman, and I think you can hear that. You know, I'm not saying we're like this or we're as good as this, but I think that other artists who possess this quality, which I regard as being like a kind of creative mainstream, where you're quite accessible, but actually you're not skimping on experiment, you're not being dishonest emotionally. I think, you know, Dark Side of the Moon is a great example of that. Kate Bush, Hounds of Love is a great example of that. I think Talk, Colour of Spring,
beautiful.
You know, Blue Nile, Walk Across the Rooftops. And more recently, I think, you know, anything from Björk has done the same. I think even Elbow, you know, Elbow band managed to produce music, which is kind of beautiful, interesting, and also it manages to naturally communicate. And I think that's what we did you know, that's what I hope we did in Noman. I think that's what Noman music does, that we managed in some way to synthesize the extremes of our tastes. And it almost goes back to that conversation we were having earlier about the extremes of politics and whether music
Yeah.
can come through and be one voice, that
Yeah.
maybe this is what it does, that it's a
Okay.
dialogue producing something that communicates rather than puts people off.
Okay. Yeah.
And I think a good example of what you said is the track Jensen Carr and Barbieri played on Love Loves and Love Cries, Sweetheart Road, that is quite
Yeah.
accessible, but this long and instrumental and layered part at the end.
Well, that was a
And
nice track. That was an interesting track to write, because that one started, it was a couple of the early songs. It was when I didn't have my home studio set up, and I just kind of write on guitar, do a few sort of 4-chord things, and I'd play them to Stephen. So that track started off as a kind of 4-chord acoustic singer-songwriter piece that I played to Stephen. And what remains out of that is the chorus. So the chorus, that's the 4 chords that ran through my song, and it's my chorus. And then the rest of it, suddenly Stephen's like, I can hear this. And so then together, suddenly something different happened in the studio. And when Jensen Barbieri Khan got involved, it took on another life entirely.
another level, yeah.
Interestingly enough, with that track, I can also hear at the very end of it, that section where it goes off musically, I can hear some of the birth of the early, more space rock Porcupine Tree.
Porcupine Tree. Yes, it's true. I completely agree. And talking about those 3 extremely important people for you, Jensen Carr and Barbieri, when I heard that this box set was coming around, I thought that it might contain a live exhibition with that lineup. So this comes from a pure fan question. Does those exist? If ever are we going to hear them?
Sadly not. I think the only things that exist in good quality, we've got a couple of more recordings with them from the BBC sessions. And we've got a couple of other recordings with other people from BBC sessions. So we've got some very good quality material recorded during that period, but not live, no. For whatever reason, we didn't have a proper live recording. So the only thing you've got are really, really bad cassette at the front of the stage with utterly distorted vocals and drums, and it sounds awful beyond belief, which is sad. I mean, but we've got a lot of studio recordings, because Steve and I carried on writing during that period, and so there's a lot that's unreleased. And one of the things that, you know, we might release at some point, I don't know, but some of the tracks, Angel Gets Caught in the Beauty track being an example, actually took us about 4 years to complete.
I know that's one of the following questions about that song specifically.
Do you want me to talk about it now?
Okay, you can go on, of course.
Yeah.
It's about how it was
course.
born, because you performed the first time 4 years before it was published in a 3-piece, I understood, and then it became a longer version with a lot of people playing it. So please go on. Yeah.
So it started off basically with Stephen and I having that opening section, really probably the opening 2.5 minutes. The same happened with Lighthouse. And so we had this 2.5 minutes, and we thought, that works really nicely. And then Stephen felt we could take this even further with that. And so I went to his house one night, and we've got the original 2.5 minute demo. And then that evening, we expanded it to something like 20 minutes. And it's even longer, perhaps more electronic and more minimalist than the version that got released. And then occasionally during that time, before we got signed, we used to play it live. So there are really nice live recordings of that piece from 1989 that, for whatever reason, are well recorded, you know, unlike the stuff with Jensen Barbieri. And also there are all sorts of versions in between where it gets, you know, there's an 8-minute version from 1992 that I heard recently, which is great, which doesn't have Robert Fripp, doesn't have Ian Carr, but it still really works. There's a fantastic 5.5 minute version, which I almost thought about including on Swagger. And basically it's Stephen and I in a room. Luckily we're nicely mic'd up, and we're playing it to Ben for the first time. So Ben is improvising and I'm improvising on sections. So the opening part of it is the song section we've composed. It then develops out and we're improvising. Ben is doing a beautiful bit of playing. And towards the end, I'm singing in a much more aggressive way. So it almost kind of ends on a sort of dynamic Peter Hamill, Michael Gira of the Swans climax.
Michael Gira, yeah.
Yeah, it just and that's a very different 5.5 minute version, which as I said, I almost thought was worthy of inclusion on Swagger because it kind of captures this period in between.
Yeah, I mean,
phases.
I think that's in the short list for being my favorite song of all time. I think that like summarized pretty well as a song what you said before. It's an 11-minute song, but that's quite intimate, quite accessible in a way, and of course the work from all the other people involved was amazing. In fact, Christina, I was asking you about.
No, I have to say something about Angels Get Caught in a Beauty Trap, because for me, I like sometimes it's a sort of joke. I like thinking about what is a perfect moment in a song with several songs. And in this song, for me, it happens at the 3rd minute when the trumpet of Ian Cars entered the scene. I really was trapped by this perfect moment. It's also a long piece of music, but I like to see the perfect moment in a song sometimes. And in this song, for me, there is one of the perfect moment. Beautiful, just sublime.
I think with certain songs there are moments where it can just be one note of the trumpet or one note of the guitar. Yeah. I mean, I'm a big fan of that track as well, and everybody's performance was superb. And I really like Simple on Flammer, partly because Simple begins almost as an innocent, simple pop song, but the lyric gets more complex and the music gets more complex as it goes along. And when we were in the studio producing that, Robert Fripp was coming up with shards of magic here and there. And with that track, he just totally got lost in it and was building up almost a symphony of soundscape guitars over the piece, which is how it ends. And so it was kind of magical hearing that happen in real time. Yeah. And it was great with, working with people like Mel Collins, Ian Carr, and so on. And of course, I feel that moment with other people's music as well, where you love the song and then suddenly it might just be one particular saxophone, trumpet, or guitar hits a harmony at one point. And from loving the song, it's one of your favorite songs of all time, because that moment just fills you with something that you can't quite explain.
I agree. And talking about Flower Mouth, I have a CD with me. A fascinating thing about Flower Mouth is also how it was rejected by the label, despite the participation of such a music giant like Robert Fripp, Mike Collins, and Ian Carr, in addition to the already well-known Jensen Carr and Barbieri. Was the idea that this legend supporting your modus operandi important in making you continue on your path without taking into account the request of the label One Little Indian?
I think that the album as a whole, what happened was this: as I said, on the first album, we went around big studio after big studio after big studio. And we sort of realized that we often preferred what we'd done in our own studio. So with this album, Flower Mouth, we thought we might never be given another opportunity to make a record. So let's make it the best, biggest, most beautiful thing that we can do. In other words, let's work with the people we want to work with. Let's make the music we want. And so we did it all alone in our studios. Occasionally we'd hire an outside studio just to record Mel Collins or Ian Carr, as it was easier for them. But it was almost exclusively done at No Man's Land. And the label weren't involved, whereas the first album, they were coming into sessions, they were telling us what they thought should happen, whether we ignored them or not. This album, we completely ignored everybody and thought, let's just produce what we want to produce. And there'd been a slightly lesser budget for it, and we'd spent it all on our home studio. We bought great microphones, great ADAT machine. We paid for Robert Fripp. We paid for Ian Carr. We thought that's where the money's going this time, not on a big studio. And so we then presented them with the album, and we had Talk Talk's manager as well. The Talk Talk connection was that Talk Talk's manager was our manager at that point. And we went in with the album, and we were phenomenally proud of it. And they really liked the track Watching Over Me, which was another one of those pieces I'd brought in as an acoustic strum along, as with Teardrop Fall, actually. And there was going to be a single. There was going to be a video by Michael Benyon. Michael had done a storyboard for it. And our manager went on holiday. We went in, and once they'd absorbed the album, especially with the 11-minute Angel Gets Caught in the Beauty Trap, they thought, okay, at one point you had the chance of being a pop band and succeeding. You're never going to succeed with this. And so to save their budget, they withdrew the single, withdrew the video budget. The video, ironically, Michael went on to use the idea for BBC television, for BBC Two. They have, I don't know, you probably got this on Italian TV as well, but sometimes there used to be very creative, clever animations between programs. Yeah. And so he used it, and it ended up being an award-winning idea. So that was that video. Damn, we lost. And the great irony was, partly because I think of the quality of the music, partly because of the quality of the people we were working with, as you said. Robert Fripp, Jansen Barbieri-Khan, Mel Collins. The album actually sold about 6 times more than the first album. It did quite well. So with no budget compared to the first album, it did 6 times better. Okay. So in the end, it's a good story. And it just gave us the courage to think, okay, what we want to do. And of course, you know, you think, had they done the video, had they done the promotion, had they believed in this album like we believed in this album, it could have been 10 to 20 times more, not 6 times more. Yeah. And again, contrary to popular belief, we were never dropped by One Little Indian. They wanted to keep us on for Wild Opera. In fact, there's a white label cassette of Wild Opera on One Little Indian. The reason we didn't stay with them is that the budgets were getting lower and lower. And basically, they just admitted they were going to put it out. They didn't necessarily have the enthusiasm for the music. Because again, ironically, we'd produced this lavish album that had actually done better than expected. And what do we follow it up with? A really experimental record full of dissonance and beats and bitterness. So I think that they wouldn't have promoted that properly. So we went right back to basics and signed to a smaller indie label who had bands we liked, like Spaceman 3 and Bark Psychosis and so on. Okay. Okay.
And how was it to have Robert Fripp playing guitar in Stephen's childhood bedroom?
It was amazing. I mean, the thing is that I've got to say this, that you'd think I'd be used to this because I've been working with people that I admire. Because when I was a kid, when I was a teenager, I loved Japan. I loved Talk Talk. I loved King Crimson. I loved Pink Floyd. And with all of this, we ended up with Talk Talk's manager, working with Jansen Barbieri-Khan, working with Robert Fripp, Mel Collins. So many people that I grew up loving, I ended up working with. And it was a thrill then. The thing is, it's got to remain something that's exciting. Don't be cynical. You know, I'm with Robert Fripp. But also don't let it overwhelm you. The one thing that I think Robert liked about Stephen and I was that we knew what we wanted. We were as strongly opinionated as he was. And we were as jokey. So on one level, we were aware of how special it was. On another, we weren't overawed or overwhelmed. But it still remains a thrill because, you know, I work with quite a number of artists that I listened to when I was younger. Now, you know, I worked with Kevin Godley of 10cc, and it was kind of, you know, amazing. Andy Partridge of XTC. Recently, I've been doing some work with Julianne Regan of All About Eve, who's an amazing vocalist. And again, you know, she had a beautiful hit single that I remember buying when I was younger. And while we're working as creative equals, and there's no sense of that, of course, I'm still aware thinking, God, isn't that amazing that I'm working with Julianne? Or wasn't it amazing that there I was, and I've worked with Robert Fripp on several occasions? Because, you know, he's a remarkable player. He's justifiably legendary. What was great about him and Mel Collins in particular is a bit like Ben Coleman, who was a great player. We let them loose on the music. And Stephen and I had a very strong idea of what we want. So the way in which I work with musicians is this. I'll say, okay, this is what I want. So give me what I want.
Yeah.
Then give me what you think the piece needs. And then maybe just improvise for fun.
Yeah.
And out of those three approaches, you get something. And that was the way with Fripp. And the thing with Fripp in particular, but Mel Collins also, was that music flowed out of them. You just put them in any situation and they were great. Instantly, they were playing in and around the piece. There was no awkwardness. And they kind of gave us what we wanted and then just played in a liberated style that was fantastic. And so, yeah, it was a very special experience and remains so, you know.
Okay.
Amazing.
Then we wanted to ask you about the process behind the song, especially the lyrics. In this process, do you draw inspiration in any way from literature? Yeah, really curious to know. And what novel have you read recently that particularly struck you? If you had time also to read books.
Yeah, I'm now, do you know, what I had then was that brain fog and that absolute blank where I have read something this year that I found quite affecting. And thinking, what was it?
Okay.
But I'll try and get to that. But yeah, in terms of sort of lyrics, it's a combination. So I'm constantly writing lyrics. I'm constantly writing phrases, titles, things that come in, and sometimes they suggest whole sequences. But I also tend to write my melodies. When I'm writing a song, whether it's with Stephen or on my own, this is why I hope it's accessible, that the melody and the emotion has to come first. And so therefore, almost like a poet works within, you know, iambic pentameter, I'm working within whatever melody I've written. So that's a kind of, and the lyrics tend to be a combination of things that I've been drawing on for years and writing, and then suddenly writing to my melodies, and something grips you and you're almost taken by that. In terms of sort of other lyricists, I've never been, it's weird because I love literature. I still read poetry. I still read novels. So I can tell you a book I'm reading at the moment, which I'm just rereading. Yeah. I'm rereading a Kurt Vonnegut.
Oh, yeah.
And it's not one of his best, but it's basically because I bought it again because my personal copy was absolutely knackered. And so I thought, and I found a brand new copy really cheap. And I thought, well, I'll reread it, you know, just to justify its place in the book collection. So I'm rereading a Kurt Vonnegut book at the moment. And I'm also reading a new book called Orbital, which is kind of almost a poetic account of astronauts on a space station observing the Earth and going through the process of being human and their own emotions and their thoughts of life on Earth. So that's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
But the book that most affected me recently, I'll try and remember. I'll have to look on my shelf.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always kind of read, and I've always admired writers, and it could be anyone from Philip Larkin to Harold Pinter to Kurt Vonnegut to Raymond Chandler. And I count this as lyricists as well. Joni Mitchell is one of the few lyricists I can really rate, where I think they managed to convey complex ideas and rich emotions in quite basic but poetic language. And I love that ability to say a lot with very little. And I think there's a great skill involved in that.
Yeah.
I think it's very easy to be really pompous and really overstated and grandiloquent and use polysyllable after polysyllable. But I think it's really difficult to say something quite profound and meaningful with very few words. And certainly as British poets go, Philip Larkin is one of those who has such tremendous balance and yet power and elegance. It's still elegant. There's actually an Italian poet, I think, Giuseppe Ungaretti.
Giuseppe
course,
Ungaretti, yeah.
And I think he has a similar ability to, with really quite plain language, for it still to be utterly beautiful and send you off at so many tangents. So I think that, you know, there are writers that that have influenced me over the years, and I still kind of read, and I still get, you know, affected by books. Clearly by this book that I can't remember, that I'm going to have to.
But it's difficult to remember for every one of us. Yeah.
Well, I think I think this is the thing, actually, bizarrely, that obviously I still listen to music avidly, and whereas I can name you every track on certain albums I listened to in the 1980s, I can't name you probably a single track off an album in 2023 that I thought was magnificent. And I think it's partly that information overload where you've read so many books.
Listen to so many music.
To find space for new information.
I think I find space for new feelings, certainly, because I think that, you know, both in terms of my personal life and in terms of absorbing inspiration from other culture, it's an ongoing process of being moved, of being affected, and also, as I've said, you know, the political nature of modern life impacting on the brain. So I'm not impervious to what goes out, and I'm still open to things. And you know, I've heard things this year that have I found emotional or affecting in some way.
Another curiosity, in your opinion, not only as a composer, but also as a music listener, vivid music listener, why is that a song can be more appreciated after several listens rather than at first impact? Is there a technical explanation, or is it simply due to individuals' approach toward a song? Because it happens so often.
I think it's difficult, isn't it? Yeah, because a lot of the things that I like or love, really, I'd have liked initially and then grew to love. It wraps around you. I mean, I can explain it with some other artists. I think that one of the reasons why, let's say, Dark Side of the Moon or Joni Mitchell's Hijira still seem to haunt is that, and the Beatles, I think, you know, there's a good reason why the Beatles are still being discussed now, because there's so much detail, even though they only used 4 tracks sometimes. There's so much detail in their arrangements, so much unexpected, unusual harmony. As you pointed out with Angel Gets Caught, you know, what Ian Carr is playing, the way in which it's playing against the other instruments. There's a lot of complex information in these pieces. And maybe we love the piece enough to listen to it again and again. And then on the 50th listen, we kind of think, oh, that bass guitar does something that surprises the ear, or there's a vocal harmony that actually you'd never notice what it does in the background. So I guess it's to do with sometimes with the unexpected level of detail and the human emotional nature, because I do think that, you know, when you're listening to a lot of cookie cutter modern pop, you know, I'm talking about the upper echelons of the charts modern pop, where it's programmed to the nth degree and it's auto-tune voice. It's difficult to hear a surprise in that, because every surprise has been programmed out of it. Whereas in a lot of the music, I know, and I still think artists are making this kind of music, you know, bands like Mercury Rev, Flaming Lips, if Björk goes in the studio, there's still an unexpected quality to the creativity. There's so much in the productions and the details. that I think that's what comes back. It's the human fragility, it's the nature of the detail, and maybe as well that there's a particular feeling that we're craving, that it kicks in again when we listen to the track.
Also, listen Fourmouth now, and 20 years ago has been really different to re-listen now. It has conveyed in totally different moods and totally different feelings to me. I have to admit it. Yeah. Thank you.
And coming back to No Man, are you guys going to think about releasing other box set or about with previously released and unreleased material?
Yeah, I think that hopefully Swagger is going to mark the beginning of a series of archive releases.
Okay.
And we've certainly got enough material to justify that. And we always talk about recording together, so hopefully that will happen again. And more recently, we've been talking about recording with the original violinist, Ben, because it's after such a long time, I think we could recapture the spirit and do something different with it. So
that's really cool.
Hopefully.
And he played on both yours and Stephen's latest album, right?
And yeah, because, you know, I missed it, and I missed some of the contribution that he made to the music, and it was great. And I do think, again, it's like Dark Nevada Dream in particular on Butterfly Mind, I think was almost like a direction No Man could have gone in.
So you said archive releases and maybe new music, and these questions come from Evaristo, that is the founder of the fan club, and he couldn't be here because he's working in South America now. So he's still working while we are here now. And he was at the 2008 Basho concert, the one you recorded also for the mixtape, that actually how I discovered the band. And he is asking is there any chance to see you guys perform again sometimes?
Again, I hope so. I mean, I've suggested a couple of things to Stephen, because I think he's oddly less keen on the nature of touring now than I am. I mean, I'm performing in January, a couple of gigs in England, one in London, one in the Midlands in Kidderminster. And I'm doing sort of 50% No Man material in my set, as well as 50% of my solo work. And I still think there's a lot of life in that material live. And I also kind of feel more comfortable producing that music live now than I ever did. Weirdly, as a live performer, I feel perhaps at my most comfortable in a way I probably did last in the late 80s, early 90s, when we had that three-piece No Man band. So I hope so, yeah, because I think that when we last played together in 2012, it was great, and it wasn't a repetition. What's really good about No Man, and I hope about the music that Stephen and I produce, is while we want to be 100% faithful to the emotion of the material, we're never going to do note for note versions. It's got to feel like we feel now and evolve with our tastes. So yeah, you know, I'd love to do that. And the Bush Hall gig felt very tentative compared to what we were doing in 2011, 2012. It felt to me as if the band had evolved and we'd evolved as performers, and the music was taking on a fresh life. And so it'd be great to do that live again. Yeah.
I saw you playing in 2019 in Camden. I was there because I was living in UK that year. There was a really cool event, and the song sounds fresh. They're really good to hear. So I hope to see you perform them again. Maybe with Stephen, also Ben. Let's hope, yeah.
Well, you know, the last time we formed No Man was because my band knew so much No Man material. Stephen could just join us. Yeah. And it's the same. I'm with a completely different band now, and I'd honestly say musically it might be the best live band I've ever been with. And what they're doing with the No Man material, again, it's redirecting it, refashioning it, and I think Stephen would quite enjoy it. And I know I think he's going to come and see one of the 2 gigs in London, so we'll see. Maybe he'll feel like jumping on stage with at some point, and, because that is what happened before, so it's not beyond the bounds of possibility.
Yeah. As for gigs, I know, if I'm not wrong, you attended the Brian Eno Ship's European tour in London last October. I saw the gig in Venice, the first, the premiere. Beautiful. I'm just curious to ask you what you think about the whole project. What was it like, the London performance? Because also Peter Chilvers played the keyboards. What do you think about?
It was great. I mean, I really enjoyed it. So, obviously, I'm incredibly pleased for Peter that he's involved in this project, and I'm still working with Peter. He's a wonderful musician and very sensitive player, and he kind of deserves this profile. So it was great seeing somebody who deserved it being up on that stage. I really enjoyed it. I mean, I thought it was a great gig. What I thought was interesting is that, again, Eno's in his mid-70s, and he could have done anything from his past. And what he does is something quite fresh. It wasn't an obvious ambient gig. It wasn't an obvious Eno through the ages. It was almost, to my mind, like Brian Eno reinventing himself as a modern classical composer. So I kind of heard it in the way that I hear people like John Luther Adams or Philip Glass. It was a beautiful kind of atmospheric symphonic performance with a lot of musicians working
dancing
one.
Quite dancing. Also the conductor Christian Jarvie.
So I really enjoyed it. So I think it was a great set, very beautiful music, and he wasn't resting on his reputation. So it was good. And for me also, it was really nice because when I was walking to the venue, I spotted Richard Barbieri.
So
we then ended up having a drink and a long chat for the first time. So it's good.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So you already spoke about something and about that. So what are your forthcoming plans? So a new solo record, some lives, what else?
Well, I suppose immediate plans are a couple of live performances in January. I've also done a couple of sessions for people, including an Italian artist, Stefano Panunzi, who's in the Fugiri group. I've done a couple more vocals for him. I've done a vocal for a Norwegian band called Laughing Stock, which was a really nice session, actually. They got a great Norwegian trumpet player on it. I'm very near to finishing my next solo album, which is, as I've said, it's the first time it's been so it's very different. It's going to be about 41 minutes long with about 17 tracks. So it's really quite a different piece of work for me, I think. And I've enjoyed it a lot. And Stephen, who's mixed it, has been really encouraging and seems to think it's my best album, which is great. I've also done a couple of things on the side with Julianne Regan, which are lovely. She's a very creative musician as well as a great singer. So there's quite a few things that are on that are happening or about to be released. And we've even discussed the idea of doing the album years live, because we've just launched the new album years episodes. Well,
the trailer,
so there's a lot. We did a face-to-face one this time. We finally met post-COVID, and we talked for so long that we produced 12 episodes in 2 days. And we met up about 4 days ago, and we've done 2 Christmas specials.
With the fans questions, right?
My battery is about, sorry, I'm just telling my
no, don't worry.
It's finished.
We're actually over, so
and the team, we've now Virgin Records are now promoting the album years. They've got involved in it. So they've been talking to us about the possibility of, maybe even doing live performances of us discussing years in front of an audience, or even interviewing some of the people whose albums we deal with.
That's really cool.
That could be good fun.
Okay, so Tim, thank you very much. That's been really, really good to see you, to talk about all this stuff. I hope you enjoy this evening with us, and let's hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Let's hope to see you again soon, and to looking forward to receive the box set, of course, and also Swagger.
Well,
thank you very much.
Get me over to Italy, of course. Anyway, but thank you very much for the questions.
Okay. Thank you too, Tim.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Merry Christmas.
Oh yeah, Merry Christmas.
Bye-bye, Tim. Thank you. Thank you so much.